In 1972, at the Cannes Film Festival, there was a little film that was entered into it called Jeremiah Johnson. The film stars Robert Redford and Will Geer, and it's directed by Sidney Pollack. Robert Redford plays the title character of Jeremiah Johnson. Will Geer plays a character called Bear Claw. Now, the feature film is based on two books, one of them that is called Crow Killer, The Saga of Liver-Eating Johnson, and the other book is called Mountain Man. The real Mountain Man's name was actually John Jeremiah Johnson, and he was a real-life trapper, and he had the inclination for cutting out and eating the livers of the Crow Indians that he had killed. You see, several of the Crows had murdered his wife, and he swore vengeance against them and the entire tribe. The script was given to John Milius and Edward Anhalt, and the screenplay was written. Robert Redford and Sidney Pollack began talks with the studio about making the film. The studio was all for it, but they wanted it entirely shot on a backlot in Hollywood. Sidney Pollack and Robert Redford said, "Hey, we want to shoot it on location in Utah." And basically the studio told them that they had $4 million, shoot it wherever you want, but that's all you're getting. Don't come back asking for more. So almost all the locations of the film were shot on or near Robert Redford's property in Utah. He owned approximately 600 acres at that time. Now, there were a few locations that they shot that were a little distance away from that, but most of them were shot around his property. Robert Redford calls this one of his favorite movies of all time. He kind of likes it because the character of Johnson suffers, but he continues on. He struggles through. Redford also acted as a scout for location shooting while the film was in pre-production. He traveled around and looked for locations for the different shots that were used in the film. There were scores of American Indians from northern Utah that were hired as actors and extras. Redford did a lot of his own stunts. He was a bit of a daredevil in his younger years. There was a time in his life where he loved climbing anything. He climbed mountains, he climbed buildings. He also got in trouble for doing the buildings. He tells stories about how much he loved climbing anything. He basically loves the stunt guys on movies, and he feels like they're super necessary for stunts where the possibility of injury is really, really high. But otherwise, he likes to do his own stuff, or did at that time. Some of the scenes were filmed near St. George, Utah, which is where Robert Redford starred earlier in a Western that you might remember called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Redford loved working with Sidney Pollack. They got along great on the set and off the set. They were close friends off the set too. Now, they had some horrific times filming in these cold conditions. Robert Redford is quoted as saying that they had 7 cases of frostbite, 4 cases of strep throat, 2 cases of pneumonia, but only 1 case of Napoleon brandy. They even had trouble getting the horses out of their stalls. It was so cold on some mornings. The cast and crew was wondering when it was all going to end. The weather could not have been rougher for the cast and crew that year, but it also turned out a perfect finished film. The role of Jeremiah Johnson was originally to be played by Lee Marvin, and then it was thought that Clint Eastwood would make a good Jeremiah. But this was when they had Sam Peckinpah attached to the project by the studio to direct it. There was a problem, though. Peckinpah and Eastwood did not get along. Peckinpah eventually left the project, and Eastwood decided to make Dirty Harry instead. Warner Brothers then stepped up and wanted Robert Redford, and Robert Redford suggested Sidney Pollack as director. Now, the budget was super tight on this movie because they only had $4 million to work with. It was cast upon actors John Rubinstein and Tim McIntyre to take the assignment of the film's music. since the production team couldn't afford a named composer. Since Robert Redford was used to this weather, he was used a lot behind the scenes by Sidney Pollack. He was constantly riding snowmobiles all over the place and digging people out that got stuck. Principal photography began in January of 1971, and at that time, Sidney Pollack had to mortgage his house to make up some budgetary differences and constraints that he had on production. It made him be super aware that they had a limited budget. They struggled around the weather and the budgetary concerns and ended up getting the shooting done without any second takes, basically. The film was basically put together in the editing room. The film took 7.5 months to edit. This film basically had no dailies. You'd just fall asleep watching them because they were all of the same thing. A guy riding his horse in the snow. It's a picture made out of rhythms and moods and wonderful performances by the actors. Now, the original movie has somewhat of a strange opening. There's an overture that runs for about 3 minutes. And then, about 2/3 of the way through the film, there's another break of about 2 minutes. When the motion picture was released to ABC to be shown on an ABC Movie of the Week in 1976, it was the most watched ABC movie other than The Sound of Music. Now here's a funny little point of trivia. The little blonde girl that Jeremiah Johnson finds hiding in the root cellar is actually the future country music superstar Tanya Tucker. It just so happens that her family lived in the area where the film was being shot, and she kept pestering Robert Redford to put her in the movie, and he did. It took about 3 months for the casting department to find the female role of Swan, who played Robert Redford's wife, the Native American that he marries. After she auditioned for a different role in a different film, actress Del Bolton was spotted by one of the casting directors. Now here's the odd thing about this. This is the only film that she ever made. I don't think I've ever heard of this, an actress or an actor that only makes one film. Now, I've heard that she was in the TV series Monk, and I don't know if that was a recurring role. I think it was for a short time. But as far as feature films or being in the spotlight of movies, this was her only film. The movie's technical director was actually a Flathead Indian, and he spent a lot of time coaching the actress Del Bolton as she portrayed the Indian wife of Jeremiah. Now, the role of Jeremiah Johnson is actually based on a guy named Liver-Eating Johnston, like we said earlier. Now, you may have noticed I said Johnston in this segment. His name originally was Johnston. At some point, it got changed to Johnson. Liver-Eating Johnson's wife, who was also pregnant at the time, was actually killed by a random raiding party of Blackfeet. Now, in the movie, they show that her death is in revenge for them violating the burial grounds that are sacred to these Indians. In truth, she was killed in the spring while Johnson was off trapping, and he didn't return to find her body until several months later. He finally identified the band of Indians that had killed her because he recognized the Tennessee rifle that he had given his wife in the possession of one of the Blackfeet warriors. Now, he was on a mission to get revenge for the death of his wife, and he recruited other Indians, particularly Flatheads, to help him achieve this vendetta. The part where they show in the movie that they continually send 1 and 2 people out from the tribe to try to get his scalp is really true. This happened numerous times. Sidney Pollack says that it took him over 2 weeks to photograph the sequences that were used where the grizzly bear was actually in the scenes. Robert Redford was instrumental in the pacing of the film. He became another kind of actor. He became far more internal. There's some of the movie that has no dialogue in it at all. There's a over 2-minute scene after his wife is killed where there's just visuals. There is absolutely no dialogue and very little background noise. You feel the isolation and the sheer depression that is setting in on Jeremiah Johnson. The film only cost $4 million to make. At the box office in 1972, it did over $44 million. It was the 7th highest grossing picture of that year. Will Geer plays Bear Claw Chris Lapp, and he meets Robert Redford at the beginning of the film and kind of teaches him the ways of the wild and how to survive in the wilderness. Johnson and Lapp meet at the end of the movie for a final time, and it's kind of a special meeting between student and teacher. Bear Claw realizes how tough the wilderness has been on Jeremiah. When Jeremiah asks him, does he know what month it is? Bear Claw replies that, no, I really don't, Pilgrim. That's what he always referred to him as Pilgrim. Then the very end of the film shows a wordless encounter between Jeremiah Johnson and Paints His Shirt Red, the Indian that's behind all the attacks. They're sitting upon their horses, they're far apart, and Johnson actually reaches for his rifle. But then Paints His Shirt Red raises his arms in a gesture of peace that Johnson slowly returns to him. The film finally ends with the song lyrics, and some folks say he's still up there still. What a classic movie this is. Excellent filmmaking and superb acting. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.